my dears. It's David McGillivray here, comedy legend, I'm told, and horror icon as well. This is Little Did You Know, the chat show. It's a show in which I talk to people I find interesting. I hope you agree. We're here doing another up close and personal episode of the show here from Deal in Kent. And why am I wearing this rather fetching leather jacket? There's always a reason, and I'm going to tell you the reason. I wrote an article for this magazine here. It's called Attitude, and I wrote a very long and detailed history of sex clubs in London. And one of the people I spoke to was this man here. There he is, look. And he gave me some wonderful stories about his life as a leatherman. I'm no expert, but terribly willing to learn. My guest gave me a lot of information, and I had to cut a lot of the stories out. There just wasn't enough room for all of them. So I thought, well, why don't I get him onto Little Did You Know, and he can tell me all those stories again, because they're terribly exciting. And then we've got them for posterity. So that's why I'm here in Deal in Kent, because that's where he lives. Will you please say hello to the very wonderful Grant Burnside?
Afternoon.
Grant, tell me, if I hadn't asked you, would you be dressed like that in Deal on a Wednesday afternoon?
Partially. Often indoors, mostly always, partially outside.
So what you're telling me is that leather has been a lifelong passion for you.
Always, yes. Not fashion, just who I am.
Where did it start?
It started with an interest in the Virginian television show in the 60s. I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and the actor James Drury, one of the cowboys, wore a black leather waistcoat, and it intrigued me at that young age, and I had no idea why.
I'm astonished that you can even think back to when you were 3. I can't.
I can. I have a very vivid, very good long-term memory. I clearly remember that, very much so.
That's going to be very useful for this programme, Grant. So you'll also be able to tell me when you had the first inkling that you weren't going to get married to the girl next door.
That probably came to the fore when I used to wank looking at pictures of Alvin Stardust in my Blue Peter annual.
Oh, please.
Aged 11, maybe 12, 1974, so I was 10, 11.
Can you remind us why Alvin Stardust?
Full black leather, quiff, resembling the 50s biker image, which I always was attracted to and didn't know why. And the whole thing with his leather gloves and the many rings, I just found it fascinating and overwhelmingly sexy.
Do you think Alvin would be surprised to hear you reveal this?
I doubt it. I would imagine, being a rock star, he's probably met all walks of life and wouldn't be remotely surprised. I'm sure half his screaming fans were screaming queens.
I've never heard that before. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Grant, now let's talk about you growing up then. Coming of age in the 70s when the look was the clone. So just in case anyone's forgotten, the typical look was a tartan shirt, jeans, and a big moustache. Did this do anything for you?
Not really. I did find Tom Selleck in Magnum attractive, that's got to be said, but I never wanted the clone look myself. And first and foremost, in my late teens, early 20s, I couldn't even grow a moustache.
Oh, but look at you now.
I didn't grow a beard until 1992. So long before the bear fascination with beards, but yeah, I was a smooth-faced young man for a lot of years.
So this is not a lockdown beard.
This is I've had this beard now for 29 years.
This is a lockdown beard.
And it was once fully red. It's now just salt and pepper.
It's looking very interestingly salt and pepperish now. So we're talking about the 70s and the clone look. What was the difference between that and leather?
The difference for me to be being attracted to it.
Yes.
I watched clones dancing on the dance floor to Donna Summer and all of the gay acts at the time, the Boys Town Gang. I enjoyed watching that, but I didn't find that sexual. I didn't find gay men dancing sexual. I found men standing clad in full black leather in dark corners much more sexually attractive.
And you found that you weren't alone in this?
Absolutely not. Though it was a little taboo still at the time, it was still much more enticing to me.
We're here in your bedroom next to a remarkable poster. Look, it's Al Pacino in, and you just heard Grant's cat Harold, who will be joining us throughout the show. But let's get back to the topic in hand. You've got a poster for Cruising. Where did you get that?
I found the poster. It's an original quad poster framed with glass in a shop in Ramsgate for 190 quid. A bargain. I bought it because it's one of my favourite films. It's a cult movie. It's about the leather underground scene, the S&M scene. I went to see it age 17 when it came out in 1980. 16 I was still, actually. I remember being taken by a neighbour and her boyfriend to see it because they had to smuggle me in because it was an 18 film.
What did you make of it? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you find it tremendously exciting?
I found it tremendously exciting, even though it was about a murderer. That's exciting in itself anyway. But no, it was tremendously exciting, and I don't think I'd masturbated quite so much after ever seeing anything. Even Alvin Stardust and James Drury from the Virginian.
Oh, sorry about that, Alvin. You were usurped.
He was usurped quickly
by Al Pacino.
Yes.
Were you aware at that young age, too young even to see an 18 certificate film, that this film Cruising was inspired by a notorious New York nightclub called the Mine Shaft?
I'd read about it. I knew, yes, I was aware. I hadn't been to the Mine Shaft, but only 1 year later I did go to New York to discover some bars myself, but I didn't know that at the time.
Oh, we're going to talk about the Mine Shaft coming up soon. I have to point out that at this stage, we're going to, thank you for commenting on that, Harold. We're going to have to keep the most graphic part of this conversation for Patreon. And at this point, a link comes up to remind Patreon subscribers to join us on Patreon for some marvelously raunchy conversation. As soon as this show is finished, you can join us there. We'll be waiting for you. But that link is for people who might like to pay us infinitesimally small amount of money for Grant and myself.
Worth every penny.
And he's not my agent, but he's telling the truth. It is worth £1 of your money. Where was I? We were talking about this film to this man. It's my guest, Grant Burnside. When did you first start dressing in leather, Grant?
I would say 1983 and 4.
Where did you find leather gear?
In a shop, a second-hand shop in Covent Garden called Flip. They also had a branch in the King's Road, I believe. I bought myself a second-hand leather jacket. I'd had a leather jacket when I was 15, but I wasn't wearing it as leather. I was wearing it as a bomber jacket that was trendy for a lad to wear at the time because the film Grease was out. So I got a John Travolta style blouse on type leather jacket with a high collar. But in terms of leather for the sake of wearing leather going to the bars, that was 83, 84.
And you told me when I interviewed you for the article in Attitude that at that time you were leading a double life, which I found immensely exciting.
Yes, I was travelling from my parents' house in the suburbs of Essex, East London, Essex, every day in a shirt and tie, working in a bank. And I would go home, have my tea, get changed, put on my leather jeans and go out. With some raised eyebrows in my neighbourhood, you can imagine, a council housing estate, late 70s, early 80s, you can imagine people's ideas and fears. But I strutted up the road like a peacock and couldn't have given a damn.
And you must have learnt from the gay press at that time that there were places you could go. Which bar did you choose?
The first gay bar that I went to that I knew was based around the leather scene was the Coleherne in Earls Court, London.
Right, let's talk first about Earls Court, because in the aforementioned article I described Earls Court, which is in West London, as a gay ghost town. It's nothing like it was. What was it like when you were there, Grant?
I'm a big admirer of Donna Summer records, and the song Sunset People is all about the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, the seedier side of LA's life. And when I used to emerge after 28 stops on the underground from Dagenham East to Earls Court onto the Earls Court Road, this was Sunset Strip for me. Prostitutes, male and female, skinheads, bikers, rockers, you name it. It was just multicultural and diverse, and it was only an hour away from where I lived. I couldn't believe the diversity. It was fantastic.
And where was the epicentre of this scene?
The epicentre of the scene was the Coleherne, and Bolton's just across the road, but the Coleherne mainly.
How nervous were you before you first set foot in your first leather bar?
I was more excited than nervous, hence I managed to just go through the door and think, sod it, I'm going in. I think excitement outweighed the nerves, so I had no problem, no qualms whatsoever.
Now, I heard from people who had been going to the Coleherne since the 50s that in the early days it was subdivided. So there would be straights in one bar, queers in another. What was it like when you were there?
Although it was very heavily a gay bar, there were straight people in there. Friends of gay guys. The divide in the Coleherne when I first went there was the leather side and the not so leathery side. There was no straight and gay division. It was leather, regular attire division.
So would the regular attire be that clone look I mentioned earlier?
They would be mostly clones, yeah, or guys that were desperately trying to dabble with the leather but didn't quite have the balls to do so.
Well, we're going...
Myself included in the very early days.
You went straight to the leather side of the bar.
I did. I went in the wrong but right door, yes. Yes.
And we're going to talk later, only on Patreon, about what you got up to in the Coleherne. I'm teasing you. I am a wicked tease. That's my stock in trade. Did you go to any other bars in Earls Court, Grant?
Yes, of course I did. Brompton's on a Saturday night.
It's been demolished now, opposite the Coleherne.
Yes, Brompton's was more of a nightclub. It was open later, so I'd have to guarantee that I was going to be able to stay out for the night because the last tube left Earls Court at 12:05. So if I was later than that, I had to almost guarantee I was going to stay with a friend or I had to pick up to get a night's kit.
Did you meet any celebrities in Earls Court?
Yes, regularly in Brompton's and sometimes in the Coleherne and often in Coper's, which was then called Harpoon Lewis. I used to see Kenny Everett with Cleo Rockus, his friend. Marc Almond from Soft Cell was always around in Earls Court back in those early days. Freddie Mercury from time to time. Absolutely. There were a couple of other guys, I can't remember who, from television and film. Paul Gambaccini, the DJ, of course, a guy I later got to know and became good friends with. It was a hub. It was the place to be without being aware that it was the place to be.
And what would you say if I mentioned a name that won't be well known to anyone looking in, but is known to us? That is Lyle Heeter.
Ah, yes. Well, I used to see this guy from time to time in the Coleherne. He spoke to me on a couple of occasions. I was intrigued. He was about 6'10", I kid you not. Full leather, head to toe. Absolutely incredibly sexy guy. I don't know why I never went back to his hotel with him. I have no idea why I didn't do it.
You told me you were too nervous to approach him.
I was. He was quite a daunting figure, really. But it was a few years later when I was looking through my Robert Mapplethorpe photography books, which I've been collecting now for almost 40 years, that I opened the pages and I saw the chap from the Coleherne, and it was the famous picture of Lyle Heeter and Brian Ridley, sitting in full leather, one in an opulent room with an armchair in chains, and his master standing behind him, who was Lyle Heeter. And I was like, I could have kicked myself for not having the balls to go there, but there you go.
You've answered my next question. You regret not going up to him.
Absolutely. He came up to me and spoke to me on a couple of occasions. He spoke to me. And I don't know why I was so nervous. I don't know why. It was early days. I was in there and I was confident on a level of which I'd kind of attained for myself. But somebody coming up to me, it kind of unnerved me. I think maybe the fact he was 6'10" as well. And he was kind of ugly, but I've always been attracted to ugly.
No, I can empathise with all that.
He was very
Grant.
sexy.
Well, we've seen the famous photo, yes, and if you haven't, it is online. You'll recognise it as soon as you see it. Was it possible, Grant, to meet other leather enthusiasts anywhere else at this time, apart from in bars? I mean, I don't have to say, that this is decades before the internet.
In the street, on the street, sometimes you'd see people. Like, I remember once, for example, going into the department store on Piccadilly Circus, which was Swan and Edgar at the time, and I was just in there shopping. It was like a Saturday afternoon and I was buying stuff, and I went upstairs to the cafe to have tea and cake, and sitting at the table was this very smart gentleman, very suited booted gentleman, older guy, much older guy, and this guy in full leather sitting having tea and cake with him, which intrigued me. The contrast of the old man in the suit and the young guy who looked like he was going to probably do him over. It didn't dawn on me at the time that this was probably a Jermyn Street chat and rent boy situation going on. But I absolutely was fascinated by the contrast. I still like the contrast.
This was like the underground coming over ground, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Bubbling up from the underground, literally, onto the above level cafe looking over Piccadilly Circus. It was starting to emerge. The leather culture was starting to become a little more publicly known.
And we talked about a magazine that's, long forgotten now, but it was called FF. That had contact ads in it, didn't it?
It sure did, yes, and it cost you a fortune to phone one of them. In the early days of phoning up a phone line to fund the cost of the magazine, and it cost you like £6 to talk to somebody for about 30 seconds. But yeah, they were the early days. And Loot magazine as well. Loot magazine had the Loot newspaper, the buy and sell trade magazine. They had personal ads, which I contacted several times with PO box numbers, and etc., and arranged to meet people that way, which I found intriguing.
Were they written in any kind of code? Did you have to know what they were really talking about, or at this time were they quite explicit?
They weren't that explicit in Loot magazine, for sure. In FF they were completely explicit because the gay thing had become more and more apparent. But in Loot magazine it was just a guy. I went to a chap's house once in Bethnal Green. He was selling a pair of second-hand army boots, size 9, and I thought that, oh, I really want them. Plus, I'm interested in this guy. What's this guy going to be like? And it was a block of flats. I went up to the 11th floor, and he opened the door, and the whole of the apartment, the whole of the flat was just boots hanging from the ceiling, hanging from the walls, across the floor. He was clearly a boot man, and that was his way of getting, as he thought, people that are really into boots into his flat. But again, that was intriguing. I did buy the boots, and yes, I did give him a blowjob.
I have to say, there's a few boots here. Look, can we just? Yes, there they are.
My friends.
Let's get comfy again and get back to the subject of FF, because they used to hold nights at the old Scala Cinema in King's Cross, where I used to live actually, and almost next door to the Scala was another very interesting gay venue, which was called the Bell.
Oh,
and
yes.
You did tell me a very funny story about an experience you had in the Bell.
I went to the Bell one weekday evening. I remember it being cold and raining, and the Bell was a depressing place, but I just wanted to go somewhere different, and I went in there. I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday night. Very few people. I got myself my drink and I sat down, and there was this chap at the bar. Quite chubby, leather jacket, collar up as I love, quiff, very sexy, tattoos, big boots. I sat there for about an hour thinking, please, please, please come and chat me up. Please chat me up. If you don't, I'm going to come and chat you up. And I eventually gave in, and I went back to the bar to refill my pint and chatted to this guy. And as this man turned around, he had the biggest boobs I'd ever seen. It was just a huge, fat lesbian, and she was absolutely enamoured and joyous at the fact that I fancied her so much that she thought I thought that she was a very burly man. And we had a fantastic conversation, and I met her for a drink again on another occasion, because we hit it off like we got on like a house on fire. She was absolutely flabbergasted in a good way that I thought she was a man, and I actually had a hard on looking at her.
A good looking man as well.
Well, no, just a bit of a pig, but I like pigs. She was just very masculine, and I found that unbelievably attractive.
Similar thing did happen to me in a lesbian bar in North London, but this is not about me. What would happen if I mentioned the name Johnny Stewart to you?
Johnny Stewart, an old friend of mine. He was of Russian aristocracy, I'm told. Died several years ago, but he used to run the Rockers Reunion nights over at Lavender Hill, where all the 50s rocker guys would come out in their leathers and go and show off on their motorbikes. And Johnny and I hit it off. He had a big thing for me, but when I was 27, he was 65 or something, and it wasn't quite a little bit of an age difference, fine, but not my grandfather's age. Anyway, but he came over to my sister's. He drove me home once from the Coleherne in the rain. He had a thing for the rain because he liked to wear waterproofs. And he used to come out riding. He had a thing for the song Riders on the Storm as well. I kid you not. So he was very much into the whole weatherproofing, the 50s motorbikes, with the open-faced helmets. But he drove me home once from Earls Court to Dagenham on the back of his motorbike, which was an old Triumph Bonneville, and I had no crash helmet on. All the way down the embankment, all the way past Tower Hill and down the A13 out to Essex with no helmet on, and I was so excited.
Oh, it wasn't misery then. It was exciting.
Oh, it was exciting. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I was cold and wet, and at one point I actually fell off the back.
Literally.
Because he pulled up too fast.
Oh.
And then when we got back to where I lived, I think he thought he was coming in for a bit of, hanky-panky, but my parents were in bed asleep. I was still living at home at that point, so that wasn't going to happen. But he drove me basically 30 miles east, and then had to go all the way back to Notting Hill to where he lived. Oh, God. He was a good man.
And what would surprise us most about Johnny Stewart? What
surprise? He was an interesting chap. He collected Russian art, objets d'art, and paintings. He also had an incredible collection of vintage motorbikes and vintage leatherware. He gave me a really good leather jacket that I used to wear all the time, and eventually grew out of. But his leather jackets were used for various pop videos. People used to hire them. And to my knowledge, I think the leather jacket that George Michael wore in the Faith video comes from Johnny's collection, and many the guys from Bros, I believe, the guy Slash from Guns N' Roses, several people I'm led to believe used his jackets. I know that he hired them out for great money as well. So, and the motorbikes too.
That's the story I wanted. We're coming up for a break, and I'm just going to try and get my camera down here. And underneath the handcuffs is a book about who?
Tom of Finland.
It's Tom of Finland. And I showed you that book because we're now going to see a trailer for a Peccadillo release. It couldn't be more perfect. It's Tom of Finland. Will you join us again in just a couple of minutes? I hope so, because we've got lots more interesting stuff coming up about sex clubs in London. Join us then.
Mitä sinä haluaisit tehdä, kun sota loppuu?
Soittaa pianoa ja piirtää.
Taiteilija.
Touko Laaksonen.
Hei, sun pitää löytää joku ihminen elämääsi.
Mulla oli sellainen sodassa.
Joku Lotta vai?
Hävittäjä lentää.
Onko tämä teidän?
We used to put scum like you into concentration camps.
Palaa paperia.
Ei se ole vain palaa paperia, se on atomipommi.
Have to have a hard on, then I know it's good.
Have you published this in Finland?
It will be easier to publish these in the Vatican.
Kaikkeen pitäisi nähdä nää. Mä en ole mikään vapaustaistelija.
Touko, mitä tää nyt on?
Tuli yhtäkkiä mieleen, että on aika siirtyä eteenpäin.
Kuulitko, että me ollaan perustettu oma moottoripyöräkerho ilman moottoripyöriä?
You're gorgeous. Can I draw you?
Welcome to California, Tom.
You might go to prison for this.
Aren't you afraid?
We are the children of beautiful Mother Nature. We homos, fetishists, women and men, straight and gay, all yearning to love.
That's a trailer for Tom of Finland. It couldn't be more appropriate because my guest this week is leatherman Grant Burnside, who's now teasing me with his handcuffs. Do you also have the key?
Yeah, of course.
Just checking. Grant, why are we here in Deal in Kent?
Why are we here in Deal in Kent?
Yes, why are you living in Deal?
Because it's beautiful and it's out of London. I've spent 30 years living and working in London. I don't need to be there all the time now. And I get a thrill when I do go back there now. So, and also Deal's a very queer town. My street where I live is actually known locally as Rainbow Road, in the nicest way.
No.
Yes.
Was this where Charles Hawtrey used to live?
Yes, I believe so. The notorious Charles Hawtrey, often drunk, drinking at the Ship Inn, which is one of my locals.
Correct.
And picking up all sorts of whoever.
Oh, the
drifters,
yes.
boys, sailors. It's a very nautical town. You can imagine back in the 60s it was even more so. The barracks were here as well, the army barracks and the naval barracks.
We're told in two Charles Hawtrey biographies that that's the reason he moved here, the barracks.
Well, I didn't move here for that, but I would have done if they'd been here and I'd been younger, and that was my lure for this place. But yes,
You've been here a while, haven't you?
I've lived in Deal for 4.5 years, but out in Kent. Lived in Whitstable prior to here for 5 years, and prior to that, London for 25 years.
We ought to talk about your work, because you weren't always working in a bank, were you?
No, I worked in a bank for a long time, from age 16 to 23. Frustrated from working in an office, I used to use all of I was moonlighting, unaware that I was moonlighting, but I used to write articles for pop magazines, including Record Mirror and Smash Hits. I've still got some of the articles, actually. Got to go to the States. I was given very good paid annual leave from my job. 30 days annual leave per year, and they would let me take that off in 6 weeks in one shot, which was fantastic for me, because I could go overseas and feel like I'd travelled and then come back to a regular job. But I got to interview people like Donna Summer, which was very good at the time. She was a huge star, she had a huge gay following, and I was a lucky boy. I kind of offered my services, they accepted, and the rest is history. But yeah,
they say never meet your idols.
They do say that, yes, but she was a sweetheart, and I know there's a lot of negativity about Donna Summer and her history and her supposed anti-gay stance. She wasn't anti-gay, to my knowledge, at all. Never in my company, which was quite often, but she was very staunchly religious, and I think there was a misunderstanding there, that if she's so Christian, how can she also be so queer friendly? But she was, that's all I can say, and seriously misunderstood. It's tragic.
Disco, your favourite musical genre?
Yeah, more the electro-European disco though. I love disco music, but the Giorgio Moroder, Cerrone, kind of Parisian and Munich-based side of disco, not so much the R&B American disco.
We're going to talk later about whether you may have gone to Berlin, but let's concentrate right now on the London clubs that I know you visited. Shall we start with Backstreet, because it's now, or it will be when it reopens after the pandemic, London's only surviving leather bar. What's important about Backstreet?
Backstreet's important, I think, because it was the first place, to my knowledge, in England, certainly London, so I would assume England, where you could go in full leather or rubber without feeling strange, or without feeling that you were doing something deviously wrong. It was openly accepted there, and I think I first went in 1987 when it was in its very early days, maybe a year or two old. And I remember the guy on the door, John, who was a rather terse chap, but if he liked you, he liked you, and if he didn't, he didn't. And fortunately, he did like me, so I would get in cheaply or for free, which was always a plus.
You told me that you went back relatively recently, after probably around 20 years,
Yep.
and you found it a bit disappointing.
Yeah, there was some kind of beauty in the fact that it hadn't changed. I mean, the same posters on the wall, the same barrels in the same corners, with, I'm sure, the same amount of shit and dust behind them. But it was I don't know, that nothing had moved on in a way that. Also, I've changed. I'm older. I didn't have the excitement of going in Backstreet in June 2019 that I had, for example, in June 1989. It's just age and wisdom, I guess. But and also the chaps in there that did come in full leather, they were wearing the Langlitz leather jacket, they were wearing the Langlitz jeans and the boots, and everything's become cigar based. I can understand the attraction for that, but the kind of rockabilly, the 50s, 60s rocker look of the leather is really my cup of tea. Not these guys standing there dressed in a fashion almost, you know, they're not feeling it, they're just wearing it. They've got good jobs, good disposable incomes, they can spend 4,000 quid on an outfit and stand there looking the part, but you get them home, they're not the part. They just don't feel it. It's got to be part of you. It's got to be in your blood. It's got to be. I'm sitting here now in full leather pretty much, and I'm as comfortable as anybody else out there in shorts and t-shirt. I don't make a habit of walking around with handcuffs, it's got to be said.
You gave me a great quote, Grant. You said, "I'm glad I caught the end of the debauched era." What did you mean by that?
The pre-AIDS era for a start, and no political correctness, which is now obviously we can't say anything. We got cancelled. No cancel culture.
Yeah.
No cancel culture. You can imagine guys in leather in a bar, hot for each other. No cancel culture. Pre-AIDS. There you go. It was a wonderful time. I did catch the very tail end of it, and it's. I treasure that. I cherish it. It was wonderful to have witnessed it, even if only for about 18 months.
Where was the best place to experience that? Would you say the Coleherne, is that the one you miss more than any?
The Coleherne I miss very much, yeah. And I actually moved into Earls Court once and lived there for a decade. I spent all of the 80s going out socially in Soho and Earls Court, mostly Earls Court. But I lived in Earls Court, around the corner from the Coleherne, for the whole decade of the 90s.
We've got a mutual friend who we're calling David Huxley.
Hello, David Huxley.
And he was at the first night of one of the most famous leather bars that ever existed. It's gone. It's a whole... I was going to say the Hoist, but let's talk about the cellar bar first, because you were there as well.
No, actually, I learned in 1983, 4 and 5. I was going to heaven on a Thursday night, which was the Asylum. It was called the Asylum night. It was mixed. It was gay, straight, kind of goth, punk, leather. Again, I found that much more attractive because the guys in there in leather were comfortable. They weren't standing on parade with a big cigar. There is such a difference out there with the whole leather culture. It's now I would be out of place, for example, now standing in a leather bar in Berlin because I don't have the correct outfit. And there is now a way of being styled in that leather fashion, almost like a Billy doll. But that's not my bag at all.
Well, yeah, you never went to the cellar bar, which it doesn't exist. There's not even an entrance to the cellar bar at Heaven anymore. I think it's a storeroom. But I mentioned briefly there another very famous place called the Hoist. This is somewhere you did go.
Yes, yep.
David was there on the first night. What made the Hoist so special?
The Hoist was harking back to the glory days, I think, of the late 70s. They did a very decent job of the venue, which you couldn't go wrong because it was in railway arches. So the setting was perfect. But the Hoist was much more exciting in its early years, and then it became too strict dress code in a more of a rubber way. It was not so much about bikes and leather. It was more about kink and fetish wear, which this is, but it's a separate part of it as well. It focused on they had to. It's when the era of everything having to include everybody, be all inclusive, meant that for me that the sexual drive, the excitement gets lost when you start to include everybody.
There's no way you ever would have competed in the Mr. Hoist contest, is there?
Myself, never. No. First and foremost, I don't think I have the body for such. I also don't have the balls to stand on a stage. I had a hard time collecting my degree certificate. So no, it's not for me to stand on a stage.
You're not a show-off?
No. Only when I'm dressed in leather and I walk into a bar and I know I can pull.
Do you become a different person?
No.
You're the same person?
Yes.
But we don't always see Leatherman Grant when he's in civvies.
If you saw me on the street tomorrow, if you bumped into me in Aldi, for example, I'm still me. In fact, people locally comment on the fact that I've got the gloves on, or I wear these boots, or I've got my leather jeans on. People say, "Do you ride a bike?" And I'm like, no. I don't need to ride a bike to justify wearing a pair of leather jeans. That's an expensive way of doing it. I wear the leather jeans because they feel good, they fit me, and They're part of me. I've had this particular pair of leather jeans for 26 years. They still fit me. They're classic Stein bike jeans, and I feel that they're sexy, and I know that other guys know they're sexy too.
Let's talk about another. I mean, I agree. Let's talk about another bar. Did you ever go to the Block?
Yes, the Block moved around. I went to the Block in North London. I can't remember where. Was it behind King's Cross somewhere, possibly?
It was. It was up the Penton. No, it wasn't. It was up York Way.
York Way. Yes.
And it was underneath a pub. And the aforementioned David Huxley said that was his favourite venue for the Block. Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I remember the Block moving, and I was most pleased once to the Coleherne in Earls Court upstairs briefly. I think it lasted maybe for 3 Friday nights or Sunday nights, whatever the night was. I can't remember. But the Block at the Coleherne was just another space for you to go and do what you wanted to do.
By this time, you could. We're now talking about the 80s, 90s. You could do whatever you liked, couldn't you?
Pretty much, yeah. I used to by the early mid-90s. I had a boyfriend who I remained with for many years, and we used to we hung out in the Coleherne a lot. We went to the Block a couple of times. We went to the Anvil on Tooley Street, which was a very seedy place. I've never seen such a filthy curtain in my life. I'll say no more.
You wouldn't recognise it now. It's now a very glamorous pub.
Yeah, the whole area was homogenised and regentrified.
It's around London Bridge Station.
They did a beautiful job, but of course, like with Soho, they're stripping the soul out of these places. They're making them look better for sure, but they're just taking away characters. They're taking away soul and spirit of a place.
I'm getting the feeling now that this saddens you, that the leather scene is not what it was, and I think you fear that it will never be the same again.
Yeah, that's true, but I do have hope. I have a young friend. I can mention his name, George. I won't mention his surname, but young George. He's 27, professional man. He wears leather. He wears it like I do. He wears it because he likes it and he's comfortable wearing it. And he's promising to me, because I just feel that it's not all about guys that get to 40 or 45, suddenly grow a beard, suddenly put on lots of weight, and suddenly buy a cigar, and suddenly decide to become a leatherman or a hard man. George is young, slim, and I don't want to sound ridiculous here, but he feels it. He feels it like I did at his age. So because he feels comfortable, he looks comfortable, and as a result, he's sexy.
But you said to me that you wished you could take him back to the leather scene you knew to show him the way it was.
Absolutely, yeah. Both George and my ex, who I recently just mentioned. I think guys of that age also really regret having missed the boat a little bit, you know. But then we could all have those regrets. I missed the late 50s into the 60s biker scene, from the Leather Boys movie. That attracts me a great deal. But I missed that. We all miss something. But the only thing is that for me there was a replacement. I don't know if for George and other people who are younger that there might be a replacement. I think it is disappearing.
The film you just mentioned, the Leather Boys, that was a kind of pre-gay film in the very early 60s. You must have caught up with that later.
Yeah, of course I did. I saw that on TV very awkwardly with my parents. And I can remember my father saying to my mum, "That's a queer film. They're queers. That's a queer film." And I was laying on the floor thinking, I'm one of them. And I was like 11 years old or something. But
I thought it was so subtle. You know, you look at it now and it's blatantly obvious.
It was not remotely subtle.
No?
Rita Tushingham's character was the girl in between the two boys.
Yeah.
The love. And the beautiful thing about the film is actually, and another friend of mine is going to be really pleased I'm talking about this, is that it touched on the love between two guys, the companionship, the brotherly aspect of two men together. It was not so much the sexual side of it, even though as a viewer it was completely sexy for me because of the leather. And I think they were possibly, I can't remember who directed it or who even wrote the story, but it was possibly aimed at a queer audience initially. It must have been.
Yes.
But it went across the board, the film. I mean, it was a kitchen sink drama almost with Rita Tushing, who did several films in that vein, didn't she?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah,
A taste of honey.
Yes.
Have you experienced the leather scene in other countries, Grant?
Oh, yes.
Shall we
Yes.
talk about New York first?
Yes, yeah. My first foray adventure over to the States was in August 1981.
Oh.
I flew. It cost me £369. I've never forgotten. That's a lot today. It was a lot of money at the time.
Yes.
£369 return, but I saved up and I booked a ticket and I went. And I had a huge suitcase full of stuff, including food, which my mum had packed, which got taken out of my suitcase at the airport. Anyway, Manhattan in 1981 was a scary place. It was the Manhattan of the Kojak days.
Yes.
It was the Manhattan of the spillover from the 70s, and it was in a bad way. But of course, anything bad, seedy, underworld was my attraction. So yeah, it was wonderful going there.
What clubs were open in 1981?
I didn't really do clubs, so I went to bars, and I can remember the Spike and the Eagle on opposite corners. And the beautiful thing about those two bars were, I mean, we're talking a hot summer as well, 1981, August. New York is really hot. I had a pair of leather jeans with me and other regular casual clothes, just my leather jeans, and a pair of black leather gloves, of course, to put in my right hand back pocket to let all the old guys know what I was about.
Sorry, what does that say?
What does it say?
Yeah.
You mean you don't know, David?
I just want you to tell us. Gloves in the back pocket.
Gloves in the back pocket meant back in the day, if you wore gloves in your rear left-hand pocket, it meant that you were you're into S&M and you were the top guy. And if you wore them in the right-hand pocket, you were into S&M and you were the submissive guy in that role.
Okay, so now we are talking about codes that no longer exist. There were also keychains, there were handkerchiefs,
whistles, trumpets. Yeah, of course.
We had to learn all this.
We had to learn this, and most of the colours, of course, speak for themselves. Brown is obvious. Black is S&M. Blue, I believe, is oral sex.
I think it
is. Grey is bondage. Orange is heavy urine, heavy piss.
It is.
And so forth. Green, it means you like it outdoors. I was desperate to find a multicoloured gingham cloth to cover all areas, but I couldn't find one. I'm joking.
Where did you learn these codes? Just from talking to other people?
I learned them from talking to the clones in Bromptons mostly, where that was the hanky code was really prevalent. There was a record shop in Bromptons that sold all the import 12-inch singles, and the guy who ran, Jonathan I think his name was, the guy who ran the record shop, who went on later to work in Expectations, he was the clone of clones, wonderful chap. And we spoke one night. He was telling me, he sort of talked me through the hanky code, and once you've worked out the first three colours, it's pretty much it's there for the taking.
We're coming up to the end of the show, alas. We are going to continue this conversation on Patreon, but before we part here on YouTube, Grant, can we talk about Berlin? Have you been?
I have been, but I really don't have much to say about Berlin, to be honest.
Why?
I went to Berlin in January 2008 with my ex and two friends of ours, our friend Kevin and his wife. We didn't do any of the gay bars. It was not. I went to Berlin because I wanted to go to Berlin. Part of me wants to go back and look at the leather scene there. But again, from what I have seen and what I've witnessed on social media and from friends who go, it's just the same old. But I know that David Huxley would disagree here.
David Huxley most certainly would disagree, because he is not the only one who claims that Snax, SNAX, is the greatest leather club in the world.
Well, I would at some point I will go back. I will go back as a single older gay man, and I will go as I am. And I will explore. I'll know immediately if it all feels a bit like, stiff and not very relaxed. But I'm told that. Well, I've worked with Germans. I worked in a German bank, and I know they're confident and they're quite sexy. Men and women in Germany are.
So you will go back on the leather scene, will you, Grant?
Yeah, in and out. It's not. I don't need to go out clubbing. I'm an older guy now. I'm 58 this year. But it still intrigues me, and I will still hang out. I'll still go to Soho. I'll still hang outside Compton's in my leather jeans. I'll still go to the King's Arms, which is a pub I've been going to for 40 years. It was never a bear bar back in the day. It was just a London pub. It was a gay bar, but it wasn't a bear bar. That's a 90s thing onwards. But yeah, I prefer the bar culture to clubs. I'm not really a club man.
What do you think the scene will be like when the bars and clubs reopen? Nobody can agree on what it's going to be like. We're now being told that the first clubs and bars will open next month in July.
I can't see. Coronavirus has had a devastating effect, as we all know. But I think it's one of the saddest things is it's being close to people without wearing a mask or in public places, small, dark, sweaty public places. And I grew up hanging around bars that were exactly that, where you had to fight, put your hand through to get served. I think social distance is here for the long run, and I don't know quite how sex clubs are going to work, but bars. But where there's a will, there's a way. When an area gets moved away from somewhere because of gentrification, it pops up somewhere else. As it did in Earls Court, it then went to Vauxhall. So I think things have a way of coming back, and I hope it does. And I'm happy to go with my friend George to a leather bar in London or abroad at some point and just stand with him and watch. Yeah.
Oh, time will tell. We're going to have to end it there, but as I say, only here on YouTube. Patreon subscribers, please join us right away. We're going to get much raunchier there. It's allowed. But for now, for the time being, it's a goodbye from my guest, Grant Burnside. Thank you so much for joining us, Grant.
Pleasure.
It has been an enormous pleasure for me as well. And please join me, David McGillivray, at the same time next week when I'll have another sparkling guest for you. Until then, bye-bye.